Good afternoon. I'm Simon Spalter, and welcome to the latest of our special Q&As. This afternoon, we have Ruth Hargreaves with us from Brabiners. Very pleased to meet you, Ruth, this afternoon.
Thanks. Nice to meet you too.
We also have with us Ian Lancaster from the LTA, who's helped me put today's session together. So welcome, Ian, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, Simon.
So what we're going to do this afternoon is that Ruth will give a short presentation all about legal governance and different legal structures that clubs can have to cater for what you're trying to do and to make sure that you're looking after yourselves and your members. And the rest of the session will be based on questions. You'll all hopefully use your electronic hands so I can see who wants to ask questions and when. And when you ask your questions, if you can just introduce yourself with which club and which area you're from. And we will try to get to as many questions as we can. And we are recording today's session. So if anyone doesn't want to be recorded, please leave now. Otherwise, and you can look back at the video later. But thanks very much for coming along this afternoon. And Ruth, please show us and tell us everything you can about our topic of today.
Okay, no problem. Right, hopefully people can see my slides and see a pretty couple of wiggles. Perfect. Wonderful, brilliant. Okay, right, so thanks very much for introducing me. As Simon's mentioned, I'm Ruth. I am a corporate lawyer at Brabiners, and I work with a number of the other members of the Brabiners team on the helpline that we have for the LTA members. So some of you may have spoken to me or someone else at Brabiners over the course of the last, I think we've been doing it for 4 years now. Yep. So today I'm just going to run through a bit about incorporation, different legal structures that you can have, talk a little bit about what we've learnt of the different tennis clubs and what other tennis clubs have done over the last 4 years, and to answer any general questions that you have. Just to remind you all, the LTA offers a free helpline to all of its members. It offers you a free half-an-hour call on any query that you might have, any legal query you might have. So if I can't answer anything specifically on the call on this session now, then by all means use the helpline to phone up and we can get someone in the team or me to speak to you about your sort of specific queries and hopefully give you a bit more specific guidance on that. Okay, so me. So why incorporate? Being totally transparent, I am very biased and I have a firm side that I sit on incorporation versus unincorporation. And that is because I am an incredibly risk-averse lawyer. And the idea of unincorporation just fills me with terror because you are at risk as individual members of a committee. So that is my personal stance. I'm going to put it out there at the beginning of this. That doesn't mean that unincorporation doesn't work in certain circumstances, but I'm nailing my flags and my colours to the mast now. So that's where I sit on this. Taking that aside, there are a couple of sort of other reasons why you might have it. So the boring legal bit. Unincorporated clubs have no legal personality. Unincorporated clubs don't benefit from limited liability. There are a number of circumstances when lenders are less likely to lend to you if you're unincorporated, and there are certain tax consequences to being incorporated. Oh, whoosh. So as I said, limited liability. For me, this is the real benefit of being incorporated. The legal problem with unincorporation is that you don't have a separate legal personality. And what that means in practice is that whenever you enter into any relationships with anyone else, so your lease to use the clubhouse, a contract to get work done to improve something, your coaches' contracts to get coaches to work at the venue, anything else really, employment contracts with people, all of those contracts, instead of them being done with the club, they're done with either the members as a whole or in some circumstances, the committee members on behalf of the members as a whole, and in some really, really terrible circumstances, just the person that's happened to sign the contract. And why that's an issue, or why that's a problem, or why you can have benefit from being incorporated in some form or other, is that if it goes wrong, then the people that you would be gone against are that individual that's happened to sign the contract, all of the committee members, or potentially all of the members as a whole. And when I say could go against them, I mean that they could be sued. So here's a couple of examples of circumstances where it's got into the news where sports clubs have been sued because something's gone wrong. And it's not necessarily that someone's done something terribly awful. It's just that something has happened for whatever reason. It's an unincorporated association, and the buck stops in those circumstances with the members or with the committee members rather than with the club itself. So I've got 4 examples here of very specific case studies where this has happened. None of them are in tennis, but they're all sports clubs. I'll go through the first one and then I won't go through the other 3, just because I'm really conscious that we've got a finite amount of time, and it's probably more relevant for you to ask your questions and talk about your circumstances rather than listen to me tell you about reasons why it would happen. But the slides will be available. Everyone can have a look at them afterwards. You can ask more questions if you've got any. So there was a water sports club. In this instance, there was a complaint by a local resident to do with the noise of the power boats, and they sued the sports club, but they didn't sue the sports club. What they sued was all of the members of the sports club. So it's not a particularly significant amount of money that they were sued for. £1,000 for the past nuisance, £15,000 in respect of future nuisance, but all of the members of the club were liable for that. Okay, a couple of other examples. So rugby club, golf club, a bit more chunky. That is, from my perspective, that is one of the key reasons why you incorporate rather than staying unincorporated. I'm just going to run through some of the different structures that we can use. We've done these slides with the LTA a couple of times, and at the outset of this experience, what we thought was the right structure versus where we see you all moving now is different. So one of the things I'd say that we've really found with tennis clubs is that there's a lot of casks being used by tennis clubs. We spent quite a lot of time talking to HMRC and the team individual. It's one guy that does casks at HMRC, so we've talked to him quite a lot about the process and making sure that you can move yourself smoothly from an unincorporated cask into an incorporated cask. It's possible. There's just a process that needs to be followed through with that. And if you were to do that, then what you might want to use is a company limited by guarantee. So a company limited by guarantee is a separate legal entity. So therefore it can enter into contracts, it can be sued, it can sue, it can employ people, it can do all of the things that you'd like it to do. It has this shell of limited liability, which protects the members and the committee members from personal liability. In most instances, there are some times when you've done something terrible and no amount of limited liability is going to protect you, but in the main, it's going to protect you. It also works quite well for tennis clubs because there's an element of flexibility with your membership. So you just, a member, essentially this limited by guarantee, what that means is that when you become a member, you guarantee that you will pay a small amount if the company ever became insolvent. Usually it's £1. And what that means is that if people come or go, you can simply resign or terminate their membership. And if they join in, you just add them onto the membership. So it's got quite a lot of flexibility in terms of membership, which works well with sports organisations. As I've said, it's fairly easy to set up, relatively low cost to continue to run. It can also be registered as a charity or as a cask if you wanted to benefit from some of the advantages that both of those structures have. Some of the cons. So nothing's perfect. I'm trying to be open about how this is my favorite, but being honest and upfront with you all, nothing's perfect. So there are additional administrative responsibilities that come with a company. So accounts and confirmation statements need to be submitted to Companies House once a year, and there's a risk of fines if you don't do it. I think practically speaking, most of you, all of you, will have accounts anyway. You need to prepare accounts, you need to file accounts. It's not an additional burden, that it's just the fact that they become publicly available. In terms of information that's also publicly available, the board members, so if you've got a company limited by guarantee, rather than having a committee members, what you would have are directors, and those directors, their names and the month and the year of their birth is publicly available on Companies House. So there's a bit more information out there about your committee members, and the accounts are available. So there's more transparency, which might be a deterrent for some people. Okay. Excuse me 1 second. CIOs, charitable incorporated organisations. This is relatively new in terms of structures. So in terms of the pros, they've got a separate legal entity, same as a company. The difference with them, though, is that they are regulated by the Charities Commission. So rather than it being an entity that's incorporated and regulated by HMRC with a cask and Companies House and for just regular companies, there's an additional sort of element whereby this is regulated by the Charities Commission. So you need to file annual returns and accounts at the Charities Commission. They have the ability to investigate them. They need to make sure that they're happy that you meet the charitable objects and you're doing the things that need to be done in order to satisfy those requirements. However, it has flexibility in terms of how you set it up. It has flexibility in terms of your constitution, subject to certain restrictions in that it needs to meet the Charities Commission requirements. And there is the benefit of limited liability, subject to how your constitution's set up. As I've said, in terms of cons, it's still relatively new and it will get there, but at the moment, not everybody knows what they are and how they are. So when you're dealing with sort of organisations like banks and things, it doesn't have quite the same structure around it that, say, a company would have, where people know what they're getting into. And that adds sort of a hurdle and a level of additional burden of proof and explanation that you need to do if you're looking at trying to get additional funding, for example, if you're looking to develop your clubhouse. So that's it. It will get there and that will stop being a con, but at the moment it's still not really something that people are familiar with. The trustees have a management responsibility and are liable for breaches of trust. I think if you're doing the right thing, then in the main, and you're already a committee member, then you're acting with an element of trust anyway. So that is not necessarily a huge additional burden, but it is something to consider. Okay. And casks, as we said, we've found that these are really popular with the tennis clubs. I'm sure if you aren't one, you've probably looked at it and considered it. You can, if you're unincorporated, you can move from being an unincorporated cask to an incorporated cask via a company limited by guarantee, or you can move from a cask to a CIO. However, there are just steps that you need to make sure that you take to get you where you need to be. So moving from unincorporated to incorporated, you reapply for your status. So it's not a transfer. You essentially set up a new company, you apply to be a cask. Because you've already done it once, you should have everything in place. It is our experience is it is administrative steps, but it's relatively simple to do. However, if you're moving from a cask to a CIO, it's not quite so simple, because they are different types of structures and they sit within different regulatory regimes. So if you were a cask and then you wanted to become a charity, you'd need to set up a charity, you'd need to get all of the registration process with that, and then you'd need to close down the cask, and then you'd need to transfer the assets across from the cask to the CIO. There are more tax advantages and tax benefits of charities, but there are more restrictions get imposed for a charity. So it might be a benefit, and it might be something in certain circumstances you'd want to explore if you perhaps had really significant charitable donations that were coming in and that you needed to really make the most of those. But in the main, our experience is that when we're looking at incorporation with casks, it's from an unincorporated cask into an incorporated cask. That seems to be the most popular route. Okay, so here is a little bit of information about tax. Now, I'm caveating this with I'm not a tax expert. So here is some information. If you have any more questions, then by all means ask me them, and I can probably go away and get some information and come back to you. But this is sort of quite high level in terms of what the benefits are of each of them. So if you're just a company limited by guarantee, there's no tax relief for your charitable donations. However, if you're a charity, a CIO or a cask, then there's gift aid available for individual and company donations, and for a cask there's gift aid available on individual donations. For charities you get payroll giving, but you can't have that for companies limited by guarantee or for casks. Income from non-members is taxable. Oh goodness, sorry. In all cases with CLGs, where it's above £100,000 for casks, and in charities. However, I think one of the key important features that benefits the cask is this rates relief. So there's an 80% rates relief for casks and charities. There's only discretionary rates reliefs available when we're looking at a CLG. And then there is fundraising income is exempt for casks where the turnover is less than £50,000. Fundraising income is exempt from charities if it's small scale, but if you're doing it in just a CLG, then it's taxable. Okay. So I've got a couple of slides here about the different steps, what you need to do how it differs depending on charitable incorporation. What you'll see is that there are certain situations, if you're a cask or if you're a CIO, where you've got slightly less flexibility, you're having to do something additional. So for instance, if you're a charity and the CIO is replacing an existing unincorporated charity, you need to have the existing charity name as well provided. When you're moving to a cask, when you're incorporating, we would ordinarily expect there to be a tax clearance submitted, and this is done in order to ensure that you don't have to pay tax on the fact that you're disposing of assets by the unincorporated entity and the incorporated entity is buying them. So we do a tax clearance to make sure that there's no issues there. If it's a cask, you don't do that. You apply for HMRC You apply for HMRC charities team to approve the fact that you're incorporating a cask. With your constitution, we've got examples of each of these available on the LTA website, but For a CIO, you need to follow the template CIO constitution provided by the Charities Commission, so there's less flexibility about exactly what you want your constitution to do. And this is just some practical steps of what needs to happen. What we would say in terms of incorporation is that if you're doing it, it shouldn't in practice make any difference to your members. It should just help. But with all of these things, you need their buy-in on it, and there are steps where they need to approve it. So we'd always encourage everyone to speak to them at the outset, try to get as many members on board at the beginning, communicate with them throughout the whole of the process so that they understand what's happening, so you're being transparent with them. And we've found in practice that the more of that happens along the way, the easier it is when you get to the end of it and you're having to get the resolution signed, you're getting people to sign up to the new entity, they know where they are, they know what's happening. So a couple of things to consider. Does the structure fit for your club? Are you going to speak to the members? As I've said, I think that's probably a good idea to do it. Who's going to deal with the administration of the incorporation? There's information that's needed. There's people that need to be told. It's worth having some sort of subcommittee or group of people that are engaged to carry it out for you, to carry it out for the club. Make sure you're speaking to all of the right people and telling them about it. Banks, your members, the LTA, insurers, HMRC, name but a few. And to consider the costs of it, to make sure that you're happy that it's the right decision for you. These are our fees. We offer a fixed fee service for this. And these are our estimates of how long it takes to get from the start to the end. So CLGs, typically 6 to 9 months, including a consultation process with your members. If you're doing a CIO or a charitable CLG or a CASC, it's a bit longer, 9 to 12 months, just because you've got an extra either Charities Commission or HMRC that you're speaking to. It just takes a little bit longer to get them through the process. Okay, that's me. I'll stop sharing. Sorry, I took a little bit longer than I was meant to. Apologies.
Well, thank you very much, Ruth. Very informative. I'd seen the presentation, but even better when you presented it. So thank you very much. We've got a few questions in the chat, which I'm just going to give to you very quickly, and hopefully you can answer. You'll come back to the individuals. I can obviously put you in touch with them afterwards as well. The first question comes from Hugh Jones. In the example of the water sports, how were the claimants able to sue all members of the club? Presumably the claimants didn't have access to the names and addresses of each member.
No, but they are, but they are entitled to say these are the members that they've contacted. I assume, I've not got the specific details, but the members are the right people to be sued. So they would perhaps have only contacted the committee members, and the committee members said, well, actually, it's not us, and it's gone back out to everybody. Because of the nature of the breach, and because there was no other entity to be sued, because it was unincorporated, the members were the ones that had committed the offence.
Okay, and if anyone wants to come back on live in a moment to follow up these answers, then you can do. So Steve Phillips from Acorn Lawn Tennis Club. I think I know the answer to this one. What are the advantages of being unincorporated?
So I obviously don't think there are any advantages of being unincorporated. However, there is less transparency. So there's not so much information about your club that's publicly available. There is potentially greater flexibility, although if you create the right have the right constitution, then there's still a fair amount of flexibility in an incorporated entity. You can just do it. You know, an unincorporated association is just a group of whoever it is working together. So I suppose those are the advantages of it. It's no change. You are where you are already, I guess.
Okay, that's a hard one to answer. Can't come up with any others. Jamie Henderson, what about community? My page just moved. Sorry, 1 second. What about James Henderson? What about community interest companies? Any experience of those or anything to tell us about those?
We don't find that they're used particularly, is my honest answer to it. So it's not a structure that we necessarily recommend or would consider. I think we would say that the CASK, community, a company limited by guarantee as a CASK, is as suitable as anything else.
Okay.
Is our experience.
Yep. Okay. Daniela Strebel, hopefully I've got that one right. An unincorporated association does not pay tax on profits from member income, which is a considerable amount. It has a negligible tax liability under normal circumstances. With liability insurance for the committee members, what is the advantage of, or I think it means of, incorporation where tax applies to all income?
Well, then the benefit isn't about tax. And to be really transparent, the tax benefit only mainly applies because of the charitable. If you've got either a charity or you're a CASK, then that's where you get your tax benefits from. If you're just a company limited by guarantee, then you don't have any greater tax benefits than you do as an unincorporated association. Insurance doesn't always cover everything, is the reality. And just because you've got the insurance doesn't mean that you're being sued. We worked for we completed an incorporation for it wasn't a tennis club, it was another organisation last year. And the reason why they came to us and the reason why they chose to incorporate was because the members were all sued personally. The committee members were all sued personally for an incident that happened on site. They defended it. They were able to defend it. But it was for the committee members just so horrendously stressful that wasn't a scenario that they were willing to have happen to them again. And so for them, incorporation just meant that they had the protection surrounding them about it.
Okay.
But it's not for everybody, and some clubs might be small enough that they just think they'd rather continue as they are.
Yes, sure. Okay, so I've got one more. If anyone's wants to come on live, if you put your electronic hands up at this stage, and then I'll come to you next. But we've got a question from Elizabeth Bruce Kelly. We are unincorporated and lease our land from the village hall, which is a charity. We had 2 trustees, but one has resigned. We now have we only have one, as no one else wishes to take on the responsibility. Do we need trustees if we become incorporated?
So what we'd normally see would happen if you became incorporated is that the land would be transferred into the company, and then you wouldn't need trustees at all. So the trustees would transfer the land into the new company that you set up, and then that removes the obligation to have trustees. You do still need directors, but the duties are slightly different.
Okay, just I suppose it's feedback from Stephen Phillips in response to his question that he posed to you, Ruth. So he appreciates. Do you appreciate that clubs are run by volunteers? Well, obviously you do.
Yeah.
And his accountant and his club's accountant has advised them how to run the club and to remain as they are. So obviously he's taken professional advice. If that's what they want to do, obviously they can do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, Heather, let's do these quickly, then I've got lots of questions. So Heather Doble, are committee members not protected by the LTA insurance?
Well, I mean, I can't advise on what the LTA insurance says. I can't advise on what any insurance policy says. It's the same answer that I've just said, which is that there's 2 elements to it. Just because you've got insurance, it doesn't necessarily mean it covers everything. And even if it does cover you, that doesn't stop you being the person that's personally being sued for the matter, even if you are able to recompense yourself for it.
Okay, and Jamie Henderson, why does Ruth not recommend we have just set up a CIC?
Well, if it's working for them, then that's absolutely fine. But I can't comment on their specific scenario. If they've established it and it works for them, then that's brilliant.
Yeah. Okay, and Jamie can come on live if he likes. And Ruth, I like the fact that you gave your opinion right at the beginning, because I do like it with straight views on these things. That's great.
It's not for everybody. It is volunteer. It's a lot of hard work. I don't take away any of that, and I appreciate that it is onerous. For me personally, that's part of the reason why I would prefer for it to be part of an incorporated association, actually, if I'm being really honest with you, because you are a volunteer. Why should you be taking on personal liability on top of it when you're doing it for free?
Exactly. So we're now going to start live questions. If you take yourselves off mute when I call you to ask a question, and you can ask questions not just on incorporation, the different structures, but anything legal if you like, because obviously Ruth does have experience at all aspects of governance as well. So let's start with Daniela Strebel. What club are you from and which area of the country? Welcome.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm from the Globe Lawn Tennis Club that's based in London. We are an unincorporated association, and we are thinking of changing our legal status, mostly for potential tax reasons. Just upfront, what I wanted to understand is, if one is made legally liable or sued for something, at this point in time, we had that experience. If one is insured for most of the typical liabilities like injury or libel, or, there's a number of items you can be sued for, you are pretty much in the same position. You have to do extremely hard and arduous work in order to fight off that legal matter if you're director of an corporation or if you are a volunteer. It's the same situation. And if you're insured, you're also financially in the same situation. So I can't see the advantage of an incorporation compared to, and that's now why I'm still wanting to understand a little bit more the unincorporated association situation. So
what would you like to know about?
Let's assume, as in our case, we have 90% of our income and of our profits is from members. And due to the mutuality of an unincorporated association, any profit we make is untaxable categorically. Only when we make income from non-members, we get somebody to come in and provide a service, and we make profit from that. Is it taxable? And that is typically a de minimis amount. So the tax advantage, the financial advantage, is very large. And as I explained earlier, the risk of liability, legal liability, is similar once you have insurance. Therefore, I don't see the advantages of incorporation. Can you maybe point out how you look at it?
So I look at, yeah, absolutely. So I think it's just the same thing that I've said before, which is I think that insurance doesn't necessarily cover everything. And I disagree with your view that it's the same if you're a director or whether you're being personally sued. I think if you're being personally sued, that is a different position to being sued as a director. It also differs slightly for all of the other members of the club. So the directors are akin to the committee members, but actually for the rest of the members of the club, they're all personally liable. It's not just the committee members that are liable in a number of circumstances, in most circumstances, if you've got your constitution set up correctly, because actually as a committee member, why should you as a volunteer take on additional responsibility simply because you're volunteering to help support and run your club? So you then are in a scenario where people that have nothing to do with the incident that's happened are personally liable for it, and they might be covered by insurance, but they might not be.
Okay, thank you very much. Graham Sievers, welcome back. Please come in.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Yes, Graham from Conway Lawn Tennis Club in North London. Thank you, Ruth, for that explanation and discussion. The two questions. We are a company limited by guarantee and a cask, registered cask. Next year, we are spending some £75,000 on resurfacing our courts, and it irks me that we have to pay VAT on top of that. And I want to know whether it is worth the effort to try and transfer into either charitable status or some way that we therefore are not liable to pay the VAT.
I don't know the answer off of the top of my head, but I know we've been asked this question before on the helpline. Can I take your details or can I get your details and come back to you separately on this point? Because I don't know the answer, but I know that we've looked into this point before
That's great, Ruth. Graham, just send me an email with the question. I'll forward it on to Ruth and you'll get your answers.
Thank you. And
I'll share them with anybody else who wants to know the answer to that question as well.
And I might tag my second question onto that because it's a question of compliance, and I don't want it to be found out that in public that we're not compliant. You said that your accounts have to be published if you're a company limited by guarantee, but the accounts we publish on Companies House,
they say nothing.
Pardon?
They say nothing, right? They're very, very abridged. Yeah. No, they're very, very abridged.
All right. So I mean,
you're fine.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Lovely. Thanks, Graham. John Swanwick, please come in.
Yeah, good morning. Good afternoon, everyone. John Swanwick, Staplehurst Cricket and Tennis Club. We incorporated in 2018 because I felt as chairman and then vice chairman that it was sheer lunacy to continue as an unincorporated association with the risk that involved. I mean, there were lots of case studies of examples where I can think of one rugby club where, as an unincorporated association, the injured victim of an accident, which is obviously quite current in rugby, actually targeted a particular individual on the committee because they had assets, whereas most of the other committee didn't, to cover a 10 million claim. So that's an extreme example, but more frequent examples are things like disputes on employment. If you've got an employee who takes you to a tribunal, gets an award, and the club can't cover the amount of the award, the officers or indeed any individual in the club could be liable. So jointly, but also severally, individually. If there are persons in the club who are identified. Insurance covers everything to an extent, but if the club has been negligent or an individual theoretically acting on behalf of the club has been negligent, leading to a potential liability, I think of car accidents in the car park, for example. Or a ball, in our case, we're a cricket club, so ball damage to a vehicle or to a person in a vehicle driving across the ground. Those things are unacceptable risks. The average claim on a personal injury liability case now is somewhere between £5 and £10 million.
John, what's your question, John? Can I just ask?
Yeah, the very specific question I've got, because I'm just basically informing people on some of the case studies that we looked at when we made the decision to go incorporated. Very specific question.
Thank you.
When you're transferring the club from an unincorporated status to a company limited by guarantee status, the club has assets. You have if you're a cask, then there are certain procedures you follow. You've outlined those. There is a question that's arisen over the possible liability to stamp duty and land tax in transferring assets from an unincorporated association to a company limited by guarantee. And it seems that it's a very subjective issue, and some tax offices in different parts of the country are dealing with it in different ways. And that possible, because SDLT now is not a small amount for an unincorporated body, it could be as if we got assets over the value of 150,000, it could be as much as 5%. Not all tax offices, it seems, are accepting that there's a nil value to the transfer, simply transferring assets between the former unincorporated association to the incorporated association. I wonder if you've come across this issue, and if so, what advice you've received from HMRC.
Thank you, John.
Yeah, so what we advise is that you apply for a clearance to specifically from HMRC specifically before you complete the process, to get them to sign off that the transfer is tax, that there is no tax payable on the transfer, and essentially what you're saying is that, and what you do is that you submit to HMRC all of the information to prove that the structure is the same. So notwithstanding the fact that you've got a company in place of the unincorporated association, your membership's the same, the people that will be benefiting from it are the same. There's no changes. Thus far, we've been successful when we've done our clearance applications for this, and we've not had any challenges for them. But you're right, John, there is if you don't get it right, then there is a stamp duty land tax charge possible for it. So yeah.
Okay, thank you, John. I'll come back to you because I'm sure you got some more expert information for us, but I'm conscious that other people want to ask questions as well. But thank you, John, at this stage. I've got some more questions in the chat, which I will come to as well. But first of all, Hugh Jones, please.
Hi, yeah, it's Hugh, also from Globe Tennis Club. I didn't quite understand the cask status. I think my understanding is that it would still be an unincorporated association, but with some benefits such as tax relief. So I was wondering if Ruth could comment on that. And the second question, which I'll be quite quick about. So if a club was to incorporate, it would have directors, but presumably the organisation could still manage itself in a way that it wants to, and have volunteers to do things like organise matches, develop a junior programme, organise a social life, etc. So I wonder if we could comment on that.
Well, if I can't get back into it after this, I won't bother.
If somebody could go on to mute. Just had somebody come off mute. Ah, okay.
We've lost Hugh as well, though. He's gone on to mute.
No,
Yeah,
I'm still. Did
yeah,
you get my questions? Yeah. Do you want me to repeat myself, Ruth? Or?
Was that the end of your question, Hugh?
Yeah, basically, I had finished it. So the second question was, presumably an incorporated tennis club could still have volunteers do certain things. Yeah.
Absolutely, yes. So first question, yes. Second question, yes, absolutely. I would assume you'd have volunteers, and you're probably running the club the same as you were before. You're just in a shell of an incorporated entity. Cask is it's separate to incorporation or unincorporation, but what we're finding more and more is either there are clubs that are unincorporated in casks and we are helping them become incorporated casks, or they are unincorporated and in the process of becoming incorporated, they're also exploring the opportunity to become a cask at the same time. So you can be either or. It isn't to do with liability. It's to do with the fact that you are providing access to the community for sport. So you can be unincorporated or unincorporated as a cask, and you can move between the. Can't really move between the two. You could choose how you want to do it.
Okay, thank you, Ruth. I'm going to come back to the live conversations in a moment. This is quite a long one, so Ruth, try to keep up with me. I'm sure you will. Okay. So this is from Richard Glass. I think you may have to go back to him later. It's quite in depth. I have been made aware of other tennis club disciplinary issues with various members. Would like to clarify what happens if the management committee does not follow the constitution. I've seen your videos and it would appear the club involved has not followed recommendations from yourselves. Is a constitution, is it a legal document or a contract between members and a club? Do the management committee have to follow constitution when dealing with disciplinary procedures? Can the constitution be changed by the general committee without an EGM? What does confidentiality mean? And should the management committee be informed of complaints which have been made about the chairman and other members of the committee and how it is being dealt with? The complaints were sent to another committee member who then resigned due to the issues at the club, but the complaints were passed on to another member of the committee to be actioned. Hopefully you followed that, Ruth.
Yep. Okay. There's a lot of questions in there.
Yes. You can either try or you can come back to the person later.
It might be easier if I come back to him later. Couple of really easy, quick ones. Constitution, it depends on what your constitution says, but it is a contract which governs. If you're an unincorporated association, it is a contract which governs how the different individual members work with one another. If you are incorporated, then it is still a contract that governs how the different entities, different members behave, but it has more. It sits as a public document and is publicly available. With a lot of them, it depends on what your constitution says to how your disciplinary process works. If your disciplinary process sets out, if your constitution sets out how the disciplinary process should happen, then the committee members, when they sign up to the committee, to become committee members, are agreeing to follow the processes which are contained within the constitution. There was a question about confidentiality and what that means in terms of the complaints. I think it'd be helpful if I could maybe if he called the helpline and we could speak through that one with him on the helpline to give him a bit more detailed advice on that and any of the other ones that I've not answered very well. I
told you it was going to be a tough one. That it was quite long to keep up. I found it hard to read it. Okay, another quick one on the chat. This one is quick. And I will say that as much as Ruth has made the offer and given you a guide on some incorporation costings, you can go to anyone and any lawyer for that kind of advice in across the country. It's just Ruth was giving a guide, and obviously Brabiners are the LTA representatives and do give that free advice as well. So that's why we've got them here. So Kathy Alexander has said, is there a step-by-step guide to help our club move from unincorporated to incorporated, or do we need to contact a law firm to take us through the steps? Is the £4,500 dependent on the size of the club?
We think that's kind of fixed for what it costs. If she wanted to contact us to speak through her specific circumstances, I'd be happy to have someone in the team look at how we can do it if there's steps that can be done more efficiently. I can't provide a step-by-step guide for what needs to happen because essentially it's a series of legal and tax actions that need to happen. But there is at the back of my at the back of the slides, there is what we think the different steps are that need to be taken at the end of it. So that sits at the back of the slides that you can take a look at.
Right, and the slides will be made available to all of you after this event. So I know somebody put their hand down, can't remember who it was, but they can come back. We won't finish necessarily at 3 o'clock, so this is your opportunity to ask questions, so please stay with us. We did start a bit late. Kevin Woolrich, please come in.
Hi there, thanks very much. It's just a basic question. We're an unincorporated tennis club in Norfolk. Casks, is there any suggestion that HMRC are withdrawing that status?
I saw your question in the earlier in the chat. We haven't had them say no to us. What I would say about casks is they obviously look at each one on the basis of whether or not you meet the criteria.
Yeah.
and that's about being available. And I always think there's a bit of a question about whether a private tennis club really meets that criteria, but thus far we've not had any issues with anyone applying getting it. Obviously we've got a new government with new priorities and new rules. The other thing to say about them is that it's quite slightly quirky thing with the casks, in that it's one guy at HMRC that runs the cask process at HMRC. He is retiring, and they're meant to have been finding someone to step into his place, but he's the only gentleman we've ever spoken to about it. And I don't know whether secretly that's some sort of indication of the fact that HMRC are envisaging transitioning them out when this poor gentleman finally manages to pass the mantle on. But so far we've not found that there's always a risk that someone will say it doesn't meet the criteria, but at the moment we've not found that they've actually anything's been rejected, or any of the clubs have been rejected.
Sorry, just by way of explanation, as an unincorporated association, we were considering becoming a cask, and so we discussed it in committee. And the last time we discussed it, somebody said, "Oh, I thought they were maybe being withdrawn, the status." I know I'm a retired accountant, and I still get tax faculty newsletters, and I know that the revenue have sent out like a round robin letter to existing casks to ask them to confirm that they still comply. And I wondered if that was the only thing, and that there's nothing else that you're aware of in the pipeline.
Not specifically, no, but
I
do
know,
that. Yeah.
What you said, it could happen, but yeah. Okay, thank you. That's
Thanks, Kevin. Sheila, please come in.
Hello, Sheila Kavanagh, Highgate Tennis Club in North London. We're a cask, we're unincorporated. I've heard the very clear advice that we should become incorporated, so I'll pass that on to the General Committee. But I just heard what Graham Sievers was saying at our neighbour club, Conway. I gather you are incorporated, you are a cask, but you're going to have to pay VAT on some work you're having done. We're about to have a large amount of work done, several £100,000 worth of work. So I'm wondering whether I should be copied into the reply you're going to give to Graham Sievers about the tax implications or the VAT implications for us if we were to become incorporated before we've carried out that big piece of work. Does that make sense?
That does make sense. Yep, that's fine. I can.
So that was the issue. It's the fact that they're incorporated that they're going to have to pay VAT. Yeah.
Well,
the Conway people.
Well, it's whether the services are VATable.
Okay.
So whether VAT needs to be paid on them, and it's whether there are ways that you can. There are circumstances if you're a charity that you don't have to pay VAT. So it's whether it's worth having the additional burden and the additional steps of becoming a charity in order to. I was going to say avoid, obviously that's not the correct phrase, in order to not have to pay the additional 20% of VAT on the works. So there are certain circumstances when you're a charity that you can avoid. You can't stop saying it.
Can I just piggyback on that? Can I just piggyback on the correspondence you're going to have with Conway about it, because it might impact on us?
Yeah, I can, Sheila, of course. I can do that. Just send me an email. You've got my details. Just send me an email and it will remind me to do it.
Lovely. Thanks very much. Thank you.
Lovely. John, please come back in.
Yeah, and also we've spoken a lot about the risk, and that's what you'd expect with a lawyer presenting to us.
Sorry.
I mean, the flip side to the risk issue, of course, is the fundraising issue and the opportunities that open up with the different legal structures that we're talking about. And the fact is that it is much easier to get grants and to borrow money if you are incorporated or you are a charity or one of the other legal structures. If you're unincorporated, it is almost impossible to borrow money, or it should be. And if you do get lent money, even by the sports governing body, one of the members of the committee will be expected to give personal guarantees, or at least one of the committee. So it is more difficult to borrow, but certainly in terms of getting money out of charities and other donors and other funding agencies, if you are incorporated or charitable status in some way. And the more charitable you are, the easier it is. I'm not saying that it's easy at all. It is more likely that you will get funding from those sorts of people.
Thank you, John. I'd agree with that. It's good comments there.
I'm going to get John to come and do all of my presentations on incorporation with me.
Well, I've spent a lot of time looking at these issues, and the risk profile. And if people knew what I know, you wouldn't sleep at night as a member of a committee if you were in an unincorporated association.
Lovely. I've got a couple of comments in the chat now. From Daniela. Does the this one's for Ian, in fact. Does the LTA have an understanding of the percentage of clubs that are still unincorporated?
Yes. So as part of venue registration, we asked the question about your legal status. So if you I'll take some crude numbers off the top of my head, but 2,300 registered, traditional tennis clubs. I think it's 56% of them are unincorporated. There's about 11% have moved to company limited by guarantee, 10% CIOs, and then there's a mix around all the others. But Simon, I can share a little pie chart of current status if that's useful for everyone to see.
Lovely, please do. And this one, hopefully I don't know the answer to this one, Ian, but I'm going to ask you. I think I do know the answer. Is there any LTA financial support to help clubs pay for the costs of incorporation? Prove me wrong.
I'm going to sadly let you down there, Simon, I think. But yeah, no, there's no financial support for the cost of incorporation. Obviously, LTA do have in place the legal helpline to help support that process, but not directly going to pay for incorporation. I'd be surprised if there was any funding body would fund that as well. Okay,
I'll quickly go through these chats and then we got 2 more questions. Hopefully, Ruth, you've still got a bit of energy for all of this. Stephen Ed Meads. Does unincorporated status or incorporated make any difference? Oh, this could be for Ian, with LTA loans for improvements.
Yeah, don't quote me.
That's a Sophie question, isn't it?
Yeah, don't quote me, but I believe that quick access loans are for incorporated bodies only, but I can check whilst we're online and see if we can answer before the end of the...
Perfect. And Emma Patterson, to John's point, you've been quoted now, John. I think the more case studies that are shared regarding the risk, the better in terms of convincing clubs to change. Is it possible to collate more of these? Well, I can collate anything I'm told about, and I'm sure Ruth can share whatever she's got, and as she builds up her case studies, can share them with us as well. Is that right, Ruth?
Yeah, of course, absolutely.
Perfect. And now we have Sheila. Please come in.
I've had my go. I just forgot to put my hand down. I'm sorry.
Okay, well, we heard from you again, so that's all good. Kathy Alexander.
Hi, I'm the one asking about the costs and the loans, because £4,500 is an awful lot of money for our club. So if we can have an hour free, can that help us to do what I'm trying to do is to afford it?
Yeah, no, I understand. If you call the helpline,
yeah,
and explain that you've been on this, and then either me or my colleague Rachel will speak to you and work out and understand your specific circumstances, and if we can help, then we will.
Okay, because we're happy to do everything we can to cut down the cost. Obviously, we've got to, but
yeah.
Otherwise we can't afford it. So it seems ridiculous for the LTA to be pushing, and indeed it seems very sensible to, only for us not to be able to afford to do it. So thanks LTA, and maybe you could support clubs doing it. I don't know.
Okay, and Ruth, I quite like the fact that you wondered what this is. I sometimes wonder what I'm doing, so it's a good one. Thank you. I wonder what this is as well. Jane, please come in. Jane Cartledge. You're still on mute, Jane. We do want to hear from you.
Sorry, Jane Cartridge from Goring Tennis Club in Oxfordshire. I'm just slightly confused about the role of trustees. And from our point of view, we're an unincorporated association. We're not a cask. We don't have any land. Our trustees are just there to manage the assets, financial assets, if were we to wind up. From what Ruth has said, am I right in thinking that if you become a company limited by guarantee, your directors, therefore we wouldn't necessarily need trustees because we haven't got land, and that if you're a charitable incorporated organisation, the trustees have a management role, so the role of the trustees is much bigger. Is that a fair summation?
Yes. So if you are an unincorporated association, then your trustees, as you say, they are holding the assets on trust for the members as a whole, and there are duties. As a trustee, you owe duties to act in the best interests of the members, very high level. If you move into an incorporated company, then you don't need trustees anymore because the assets are all held by the company. So you have directors. Directors have statutory duties. They're slightly different, but in essence, you're acting in the best interests of the company. And then if you have a charity layered on top of that, whatever structure it is, if it is also a charity, then you would typically have charity trustees, and the charity trustees have trustee duties, but their trustee duties are slightly more onerous because of the charitable obligations as well. So rather than you just acting in the best interests of the members, you're acting in the best interests of the charity, and your duties are to further and promote the charity as a whole. So it's a slightly more onerous role if you're a charity than if you are either just a company and you're a director of a company, or you're just a trustee of an unincorporated association.
So just in terms of, clubs finding it difficult to get volunteers and particularly finding it difficult to get trustees, does that tend to swing things in favour of becoming a company limited by guarantee rather than a CIO?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. I think that's the there are tax advantages of being a charity, and there are tax advantages of being the CIO, but you do have these trustee responsibilities, and as you say, it's hard to get volunteers.
You could get the tax advantages of some of them by becoming a cask, because we're not a cask. Yeah.
Yes, you could. Yeah.
Thank you. I'll lower my hand.
Thank you. I'll come to you, John, in a moment, but I'm just going to give Fiona a chance to speak, please.
Hello, I'm from Penzance Tennis Club. Just to kind of follow on with regards to the cask and the tax implications, we're currently unincorporated, but we are a cask. If you became incorporated and you're a cask, which kind of tax implications take precedence? Because obviously on that spreadsheet you shared,
the cask, you keep your cask status. So you keep your cask status, but you just have the benefit of it being in a limited liability shell.
Yeah. Okay.
So you still have the same tax benefits you had previously.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
No problem.
Okay, and on the chat, Elizabeth Bruce Kelly, why do we need trustees for land we don't own? We lease our land from another organisation. Our assets include a clubhouse, and we only have 3 courts.
You don't necessarily need trustees, but your members, if you have committee members, effectively they're acting on trust for the assets. Someone has to, so if you have an actual asset like land, then you would normally have a deed which holds that. You don't necessarily need formal trustees if you're unincorporated, but somebody is holding those assets. If you've got any assets, someone is holding them on trust for the members, so they are trustees by virtue of that.
Okay, and in case you're
unless all of your members are holding it.
In case you're not looking at the chat, Ian's come back about the loan question. If you're successful in being awarded a loan, you'll be required to sign an agreement which is appropriate to the structure and level of the LTA TF investment. There is more information on, I'm not going to read out the whole link, but on the LTA site. John, please come back to us.
Yeah, just grabbing the opportunity. It's not often you get free time from a lawyer, is it? The question that I've got is about going back to risk. I've been told that the expectation is in this increasingly litigious society that the growth area in claims against any organisation, but particularly sports clubs, is going to be around safeguarding and welfare issues, child abuse, and so on. And, you know, I know from wearing my safeguarding hat that with the greatest will in the world, most clubs run by earnest volunteers aren't going to be at risk with safeguarding issues, and that negligence will almost certainly come out. Are you aware of many cases in tennis on that score at the moment, and is it growing?
So we would say that I'd echo that. Our experience is that in terms of the queries that we're getting from the helpline and the number of questions that we're having, an increasing number of those, it's always been fairly popular, safeguarding, but an increasing number of questions are about safeguarding and issues surrounding protection of vulnerable individuals. So it is absolutely an area that everyone needs to be mindful of, and I think you're quite right. It's definitely an area where people are more likely to sue these days. Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. So this session, I think, has been highly interesting for everybody. Ruth, thank you so much for your presentation and your expertise. Ian, thank you for helping me set it up. We're all volunteers trying to make our club stronger and better. Thank you for coming along and allowing me to bring you all together so we can all share each other's experience and views and questions. I've put onto the chat some future events that we're holding, also our different groups and how you can join our groups, and also pass on the details to other people. So please do. The more members we have, the more guidance we can get from each other from across the country. Big, small clubs, we cater for everybody. So thank you very much for coming along, and hopefully I'll see you all again soon. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.